Hello, everyone. This is Hogan Gidley. Today, Chad Wolf and I will discuss the blockbuster hit Sound of Freedom. It's a true story about the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world, child sex trafficking, a really horrific situation. And we'll talk about the congressional investigation into Hunter Biden that with every passing day is turning into an investigation into President Joe Biden. Also, we'll sit down with former domestic policy director for President Trump, who later became the founder and president of the America First Policy Institute, none other than our very own Brooke Rollins. Welcome to The Tank.
Coming to you from our nation's capital, this is The Tank, your voice in Washington, D.C. and around the country. Broadcasting from the America First Policy Institute offices in D.C., this is the premier think tank podcast where we discuss the challenges facing our nation, talk policy, and advance America First solutions. Welcome to The Tank.
Hello, this is Chad Wolf.
And this is Hogan Gidley.
Coming up, we're going to sit down with the founder and president of AFPI, Brooke Rollins, for just a fascinating interview. But first, Hogan and I are going to tackle a movie that has just recently come out called Sound of Freedom that's breaking a lot of blockbuster records. But before we do that, Hogan, we are a couple days past July 4th. Just wanted to ask you, any great plans, any great experiences you had over the 4th?
Well, I mean, I celebrated the birth of this wonderful nation like so many others around this country. Went to the beach, had a good time with some friends, and, just got out in the sun, got out of the swamp, and, experienced real America for a little bit.
Yeah, the beach, real America. Great. Love it. Love it. I think someone else was at the beach. I saw some images of President Biden sunbathing at the beach. So did you happen to run into him? Did you stumble over him by any chance?
Well, you can't unsee those images of Joe Biden at the beach. However, I didn't stumble over him. He had some tough times with his chair. I've seen the video. Yeah. He's rough. He's getting around fine. Look, he's out celebrating at the beach. I'm out celebrating at the beach. That's about where the parallels end. But still,
God bless the beach.
God bless the beach.
It's good stuff. Well, we talked about July 4th, and, one of the things that I'm a fan of, love to watch new movies that come out.
Sure.
And July 4th there's usually one or two good blockbusters in there. I recall Independence Day coming out around July 4th, way back when. But I think an interesting one came out over the last week or so. It's called The Sound of Freedom. And this is a movie that is kind of an unlikely contender. It's at the top of all the box office ratings, right? It's actually beating out Indiana Jones, which is, over a $200 million budget. This budget for this movie was about 14 or 15 million. It's a faith-based movie about child sex trafficking specifically. I'll just go into a little background for some of the listeners. So it's actually based on a true story. Individual named Tim Ballard. It's played by Jim Caviezel, also from The Passion of the Christ. As a former U.S. Government agent, a former DHS agent who, during his time at ICE, dealt with sex trafficking victims in trying to uncover some of these heinous crimes. Resigned from DHS because he thought he could do more work on his own, founded his own company, Operation Underground Railroad, to try to rescue some of these individuals that have been sex trafficked over the years. And that's what the movie's about. And it's a powerful movie. AFPI's got some links to the movie. I should say one of our board members, Bob Onanwe, the CEO of Goya Foods, is a big kind of supporter of this movie, has helped get it off the ground. And we'll talk a little bit about where it's been for the past 6 or 8 years. But we also premiered this movie back in October of 22. AFPI did at our Hispanic Leadership Conference in Miami. So this is something, not only the movie that we've been aware of, but obviously the issue. And we'll talk a little bit about the sex trafficking, the child trafficking, and how it relates to what's going on at the border here in a little bit. But any of your thoughts about the movie as we get started here?
I mean, look, this is one of those issues to me that stems from a broader issue at the southern border, a broader issue of immigration issues writ large. You dealt with those directly at DHS, Chad, so I'm really excited to hear about your thoughts. And I think you knew Tim Ballard's unit over there at DHS and what they did. Obviously, he left DHS, I guess, in the early 2012, something like that. But still, what fascinates me here is by the Department of Labor statistics, there are about 6 million kids in forced labor of some kind around the world. So that's whether it be, human trafficking, the child smuggling we talk about, whether that's sex labor, whether it's, labor for actually working in manufacturing or some plant of some kind. So it's a serious problem facing this country. What I can't wrap my head around is a movie like this that's so popular, based on an actual true story, why so many in the media and the left are attacking the movie for all kinds of weird things as being conspiratorial when it's a true story. That doesn't make any sense at all. They blow it off saying, well, there's no such thing as a elite level child sex ring of any kind. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Are you just ignoring Jeffrey Epstein for the last, we have receipts that dealt with prime ministers and presidents and royalty, a private island, girls that have come forward. A girl who's 27, I was watching an interview she gave on Sky News, a girl named Sarah Ransom, saying she was raped 3 times a day. She was 10 when she was picked up. She got out of it by the time she was 27. These are horrific stories that are real, that are happening to children across this country. Why wouldn't the media be all in on trying to get to the bottom of this and put forth resources to protect these kids? Look, we spend a lot of money on determining the factors and the ramifications of caffeine and soft drinks on kids, what Instagram does to the psyche of children. But no one cares about this child sex trafficking, which is obviously real and obviously occurring. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I think those are all good points. I think there's a variety of different factors here. One, this is dark stuff. This is not, it's
evil.
It is super evil. And to write about it and to investigate it and to really sink your teeth into it, like the movie Sound of Freedom does, it pulls on you, and it's tough to do. And I think some in the media just want to dismiss that and say, well, there's some cases here and there, but this is not in the mainstream, right? I've got a fact check here from Washington Post during the latter part of the Trump administration, talking about when President Trump, who was a very advocate for talking about the perils of human trafficking, they go on to fact check him, saying human trafficking is not as bad as he has said it to be. And that's simply not the case. Working at DHS, understanding what ICE does day in and day out, they have various missions there, but one of their missions is to stop this sex trafficking and human trafficking that's coming across our borders, particularly our southern border. And that is one of their missions. And to understand what they do day in and day out, just like Tim Ballard did at DHS, is you encounter some of the worst human beings on this planet. And to dismiss that by saying, well, it just doesn't happen in large numbers. So, obviously former President Trump was wrong when he claims that this is actually a real threat, right? It's so fantastical because it's coming from, of course, again, Klessler from the Washington Post, who's probably never been to the border once. So we'll put that aside.
Sure.
But these folks really don't understand what's going on there. And I think that's why I like that movie. I like the movie so much. Yes, it takes place in Colombia, but what it shows you is this is also taking place in Mexico. It's also taking place in Central America. It's taking place, unfortunately, in the United States as well. And I think it puts such a spotlight on it in such obviously a theatrical way that it's hard to dismiss it. But you are right. Critics are trying to dismiss it left and right.
Yeah, and what's so interesting to me is the villains are real. The kids are real. The human traffickers are real. This is a true story. And yet we're supposed to pretend it isn't happening. Now, what you said was interesting in that a lot of people on the left are saying, well, it's not happening in the numbers the movie claims or the numbers that President Trump claims. So what's an acceptable number then of human trafficking, child sex ring worker? Like, what's acceptable to you? The answer should be 0. And I think Donald Trump said that actually in a kind of a press conference in the cabinet room. I remember back in early February of 2019, he actually had Tim Ballard to the White House, and someone who was running DHS at the time, Kirsten Nielsen, was there as well, to his left and right, respectively. And Tim outlined some pretty horrific and gruesome situations and had people in the room. I met with him because I was there. I was in the pre-brief, and I sat down with him. And they were telling their horrific stories, and they were talking about being stuffed into different compartments in cars and the engine blocks and the trunks and trying to get across the border in the way that they did. And Tim was outlining two different cases. One was a kid who was caught in Mexico, had an easy trip through the border, no wall, no nothing, got to New York, was raped, he said 30 or 40 times a day for money, part of a sex ring, and then said, conversely, there was a girl who was captured, a boy who was captured who was 5 years old in Mexico, and he was forced into child pornography. 5 years old, was forced into child pornography. And when that person tried to bring him into America, they came across at Calexico, where there is actually a wall, right? So they had to come through a checkpoint, and guess what? That person got caught, and that kid was freed. So it does, while it is evil and it is dark, there are policy prescriptions that can help this when it tries to come into our country. Right now, those policies are non-existent. Yeah. They mock the wall or something, whereas Tim Ballard gave credit to that structure for actually funneling the criminals into a smaller compartment where you could find out who was doing the bad stuff. So there's a policy prescription here, but also just morally, we're a better country than that. We need to be trying to find out what is going on here. And for a media that is largely supposed to be curious and ask questions, when they're given this type of data and information, they label it, they dismiss it, they try and debunk it. Instead of trying to get to the bottom of what actually is occurring, I don't know if they just don't want to do the work or they don't care. It's so frustrating to me because I was a journalist, 25 years ago, and I would have had questions if this movie had come out and it was based on a true story. What are we doing about this? What are the numbers? How are we getting this fixed?
Look, I think part of it is for them to acknowledge that this is real, it's happening in large amounts, and this is a problem that we need to tackle head on. They have to acknowledge that what's occurred over the last 28 months along that southern border has been a failure.
That's right.
Because we have seen
the
amount of human trafficking and smuggling at that border is at an all-time high. And I just don't think that the press wants to do that. Certainly the elites in Hollywood don't want to do that. So that's why you see some of the criticism. And I'll tick through some of this criticism, right? You've got The Guardian. Okay, so it's The Guardian.
Very conservative.
Talks about a paranoid new movie.
Paranoid.
Their description of The Sound of Freedom, a paranoid new movie. Right, they're
ask those kids that were saved in that movie how paranoid they were.
I'm not sure which part of this is paranoid, but nevertheless, and they don't really say that in their article.
Sure,
right? They go on to trash not only Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad, saying that they've made claims that aren't true, that have kind of been debunked. They obviously trashed Jim Caviezel in his role, talking about he's a QAnon conspiracy theorist and he's crazy. They're doing everything but actually talking about the movie itself. I think the best one is Rolling Stone, who big write-up about the movie, but goes on to talk about and talks about how he author sat watching The Sound of Freedom, quote, the mostly white-haired audience around me. Okay, so why would you say that about A Sound of, right? Again, they're trying to paint this as a right-wing, only white people care about this. This isn't actually happening. And it goes on and on. Let me try to pull up something else.
Wait. They said white-haired?
White-haired. So it's not only, I'll have to go back and read that, but yeah, white-haired audience around me. So I'm,
So it's only
old people.
The elderly care about human trafficking, child smuggling, and sex rings. We can't be bothered with it because we're young and hip and we think it's cool. What does that even mean?
Well, I don't think they know.
Okay.
It's crazy, but
that's fair.
Talked about The Sound of Freedom as a white savior narrative, right? I'm giving you a flavor of this because this is what the mainstream media, elite Hollywood, and others are trying to dismiss this movie because A, it's widely successful in a very low budget, but it's taking on a very difficult issue that I think mostly those on the right and the conservatives like to face and like to tackle, and we like to talk about it. You don't hear the same outrage from folks on the left, and I think this is their effort, in part, to try to dismiss the seriousness, to say, oh, there's only a certain segment of this population that really cares about this, and oh, by the way, the leading character is a crazy conspiracy theorist, and try to put it in that context.
I mean, I guess your point off the top was strong to me in that it would be a tacit admission that the border policies of this administration just don't work, and they have caused an influx of children coming in this country. I mean, what did you say? The New York Times reported how many thousands of kids missing right now?
Yeah, 85,000.
85,000 they can't find. I'm not saying they're all in a sex ring, by the way. I'm just saying 85,000 the government can't put their hands on. They don't know where they are. That's obviously a problem. But, what's interesting is every time there's a problem with this administration, they just try to point to the old one and say it's the last administration's fault. We're just picking up the pieces. You'd think at the very least they go, yeah, this is a big problem and it's all Trump's fault. You'd think, just to try and be intellectually honest here and follow the pattern they followed in the past. So I still can't wrap my head around why they don't want to talk about it, and I can't figure out if it is look. Remember the movie Taken with who was the
Liam Neeson?
Liam Neeson, yeah. Right. That was a very popular movie, right? Because in large part the good guys win, the girl gets saved, etc. But it does start to show that underbelly, that seedy, evil underbelly of the human trafficking ring, what they do to these young girls at young ages. I don't remember the outrage about that because it was just kind of fun and a Hollywood blockbuster. This is one that gets more to the realism of children who, the girl at the time was in her teens, I think, in the movie. These are like children. Maybe they don't like the grotesque nature of it and they recoil at it and don't want to talk about it. Maybe it has to do with they don't want to protect life in large measure. I don't know, but it's just an odd mix to me where so many factors in this movie point to the need for substantive policy changes and a roll up the sleeves, confront what the problems are around this world with child trafficking, child smuggling. I just don't think they want to do it.
I think that's right. And so you opened the door. I'll walk through that, Hogan. Obviously, at AFPI, we've got a number of different thoughts on this topic, thoughts on how we secure the border and how we stop some of the smuggling and the human trafficking that we're seeing. So we've talked a lot about that. We've written a lot about that. I encourage folks to go to the website. They can hear, they can see, and they can actually hear, because we do a couple of webinars on those America First approaches to actually securing the border and trying to get at the heart. Look, you're never going to eliminate sex trafficking and human trafficking, although that is a laudable goal, but you want to reduce it in amount. You want to drive that deterrent in the system, and that's what we don't have right now. So it's a fascinating movie. I mean, we kind of jumped into it and talked about a lot of heavy issues here. But if you really want to understand, what is life like for some of these children, and again, it takes place largely in Colombia and South America, but the parallels can be the same as if you're being trafficked in Mexico and across that southern border, because I can guarantee you that is occurring every single day.
And that may be a stat that the guy didn't like in the media who was trying to point this out in one of these stories was I think Ballard says something like America's the third fastest growing destination for these children. So that puts the spotlight right on this country and our problem. So maybe that's part of the issue.
Yeah, and then I'll wrap it up with this. I think the last piece is it cuts against the left's narrative, and the left's narrative is everyone approaching that border is coming here for a better life, and they want they want a better job, and they're mostly children and women coming in here. And if we turn our backs on them, then how dare we? And we're called terrible names for doing that. I think what this movie. The premise of this movie tells you that there are evil people out there doing evil things, and that you have to confront that head on, because if you don't, then you tacitly accept what they're doing, and you build an infrastructure and a policy infrastructure that allows them to do this, which I think is what's been going on over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, you've been doing so much work on that in DHS and obviously here at AFPI too. So
it's a little bit of a dark topic.
Dark topic, but very
movie.
relevant and very important because policy matters and it can effectuate some serious change, especially on this matter. And speaking of investigations and curiosity, as we're talking about the press not being curious about child sex trafficking, it seems as though the Congress right now is doing some yeoman's work on investigations, being quite curious on several different topics. One of those is Hunter Biden. Now, I've long said that any investigation into Hunter Biden, if done properly, could actually turn into an investigation into the president of the United States, Joe Biden. And it appears that kind of seems to where Comer, James Comer, is going in the House. And they put forth a report, had some interesting things in it, a lot of things that the press, again, refuses to cover for whatever reason. But, you've heard the phrase follow the money. Here's a great sentence or two that follows the money. It says in Comer's report that on March 1st, 2017, less than 2 months after Vice President Joe Biden left public office, a Chinese company wired $3 million to a guy named Rob Walker and his company. The next day, that company wired $1,065,000 of that $3 million to a company associated with a guy named James Gillier. That was another Biden family associate. And afterwards, the Biden family received approximately the same amount, $1,065,000 in payments over a 3-month period into different bank accounts. From the bank records, it appears the Biden family received approximately 1/3 of the money obtained attained from the China wire. Now, these are bank accounts. These are bank records. These are wire transfers. This isn't speculation. This isn't, hey, here's what I think happened to the money. Look, there was $1 million here, and then it showed up $1 million there. These are actually transactions that occurred that can be documented. So again, for me, for whatever reason, the left, the media refuses to acknowledge this or have a conversation about it, but it appears to be picking up a lot of steam because there's a lot of smoke there, and it matters to the future of this country whether or not our leaders on the right or the left have any ties to foreign nations, or whether it matters. And remember, we were told by reliable sources and experts in the mainstream media that if Donald Trump had a conversation with Russia, that was a big problem, and it would have been if it were true. It wasn't. This appears to have a whole lot more teeth and a whole lot more credibility than what we've seen in the past, and the media just aren't talking about it.
Yeah, I think this is important for a variety of different reasons. One is, look, I think everyone would acknowledge Hunter Biden's probably a hot mess, but I'm not so much concerned about what he's doing and his paintings and all that. I think from my perspective is what is the investigation showing as it relates to President Biden?
Sure.
During his time as vice president, during his time out of all these different things are leading.
Hunter's not the first wayward son of a president.
Yeah. Look,
that's not a big deal.
Children are children, but this is more, as you indicated, Hogan, this is more about the president than anything else. And the question for me, and I think the question for AFPI is, that link to China is concerning on a variety of different levels, right? Because we've talked a lot here at AFPI about really the largest existential threat to the United States is the Communist Party of China. And if we have a vice president, former vice president, and now president doing significant business, I should say, and getting very large payments from different companies in China, which all have ties to the Communist Party of China, what does that mean? And what does that say? And I'm not sure that I know, but I do know it should be investigated. And I do know that it should be taken seriously because it's not just a one-off thing. This is some serious accusations about a connection between current leadership leading the United States and probably our number one adversary.
Yeah. And the other two we're facing issues with are all the countries that this family allegedly received payments from: Russia, Ukraine, and China, the aforementioned China. That's obviously a problem for a myriad of reasons, but one of the allegations that Comer and his group are making is that policy was dictated by what these foreign nations wanted, basically to the highest bidder. What do you want us to do policy-wise that will benefit you, and you give us money and we'll make it happen? That obviously is not an America First ideology or agenda. That's a put the money in my pocket first and then I'll to hell with my country. I just want us to get rich. So I think the more and more this begins to be unpacked and unfolded, we're going to find out the layers that occurred here over several years of a family that the allegations are trafficking off of their names or whatever they're doing to try and enrich themselves. That's obviously a big problem. But when you're talking about China and you're talking about, media bias occurs in two ways: what you cover and how you cover it. So if they decide not to cover the southern border, the human trafficking we were talking about, the child sex rings we were talking about in the first segment, okay, they don't cover it. But if they say, hey, we have drugs coming across the country, coming across the border, into our communities, fentanyl's killing us. The media reports that. Okay, but how they cover it matters. Meaning, if they don't bring up the drug cartels, that doesn't tell you where it's coming from. And if they don't tell you the drug cartels got them from China, then that sure doesn't tell you the whole story and the whole picture. Meaning, if they were to have that fulsome conversation about where those drugs are coming from, and then you see a correlation or link between the Biden family and China, it becomes a whole bigger issue that, again, I don't think so many on the left, so many in the media want to address. And I understand why they don't, because it's dark, it's seedy, and it's a problem for the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we've talked a lot about this from an AFPI perspective, whether you're talking about TikTok, whether you're talking about agricultural land that the Chinese, the Communist Party of China
Weather
is
balloons
buying up.
floating across.
And the list goes on and on. Fentanyl, you brought that up. The precursors coming from China into Mexico and into the United States. There's a whole host of issues that we have serious concerns about as it relates to China. And the question that this investigation, at least for me, gets down to is the current president and his leadership team, are they compromised on dealing with some of these issues because of what has occurred in the past?
Right.
For me, that's the heart of the matter. And the question is, there's a lot of smoke. Is there fire? And we'll see what the investigation eventually unfolds.
Yeah, all those sayings, you don't bite the hand that feeds you, right? If you're getting money from a certain group, you don't want to go after them, what you just said also. So it's a layered issue, and we got to get to the bottom of it, because the policies and the future of this country, again, are what matters and what really can get us back on the track to protect the futures for all Americans, regardless of race, religion, color, or creed.
Good stuff. Well, Hogan, we're going to turn the tide here a little bit. We're going to jump into our interview here with the CEO and president of America First Policy Institute, Brooke Rollins. Brooke's story, though, is unique, and we're going to get into that a little bit. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version, and then I think Hogan will dive into it a little bit. Raised in a small town, Glen Rose, Texas. Single mother. Went on to Texas A&M on an ag scholarship. We'll rib her about that a little bit.
Her only flaw, as I see it.
It's okay.
Come on.
A&M. First female student body president of A&M, which is actually a very, very big thing. Very
Thank you.
big. Now is a proud mother, which we'll talk a little bit about. Softball league coach champion.
Yes.
Champion. Very, very impressive.
Thank you,
But probably some of the
Chad.
more professional accolades would be Governor Rick Perry's first policy chief, president of the Texas Public Policy Foundation for about 15 years, and really grew that from an organization based in San Antonio, moved it to Austin, and really became sort of the example of just great state-based think tanks around the country, and others have tried to emulate what she did there at TPPF. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, her time in the Trump White House as director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. 3 years there, lots of stories, driving that domestic policy agenda, and now, of course, the president and CEO of America First. Mother of four, as I mentioned. Brooke, pleasure to have you here. Glad to see you in studio.
Well, thank you. Anytime we start a conversation with the Aggies, I know it's going to be a good one. Right, Hogan? Right, Chad?
To be clear, she also is a University of Texas graduate.
No, we don't talk about that,
Okay.
Chad.
Well, facts are facts.
Yeah, no.
That's how we go.
Stubborn things.
That's how we go. Let me start the conversation off here a little bit. We talked a little bit about White House. We talked about director of the Domestic Policy Council. Give the listeners just an idea of what does the director of domestic policy actually do in the White House from day to day in advising the president, but also the senior staff of the White House and moving that agenda forward. And then, maybe one story about, what's the biggest surprise that you found doing that job?
Well, first of all, what a joy to be here with two of my favorite boys in the world. Hogan and Chad, you guys are just awesome. And what a dream to get to work with y'all every single day at AFPI, previously in the administration, but now the work continues. And I know we'll be working together for a really long time, whatever that looks like over the coming years and decades. So I just want to say thank you for having me. Being in the last White House was just incredible. working for our former boss, all of our former boss, who really challenged us to swing for the fences every single day. He didn't really believe in moderation of policy. He wanted it to be done immediately, which for a lot of people, I think that was difficult to work under. For me, I really thrived under that sort of challenge every day. And so to your question about what does, the head of domestic policy do, I think it just really depends on the president, first of all, but even on the person. And so for me, I was really given the opportunity to carve out how I believed that role should look. And the good news was I had actually been in the White House for some time before moving into that role. So I had really begun to understand President Trump's vision, the team, the incredible people around us, like both of you, Secretary Wolf and Hogan, working with Sarah Sanders in the press office. It was really a family. And so from my perspective, every day I realized that, and I think this is potentially human nature too, there is an instinct to spend all your time on defense, especially in the Trump White House. We had a lot of opportunity to play defense, lots of people coming at us every single day. But also part of it was the sort of the administrative bureaucracy, where you're basically in the White House running a government with millions of employees and, the impact every day on the 300 million plus Americans and around the world. And so I think it's easy to get caught up in answering the emails and meeting after meeting after meeting. I think my average day of meetings ran between 20 and 27, starting at 6 a.m. and going till 10 or 11 at night. And so when that happens, I believe you tend to lose, or you could lose if you're not careful, the ability to play offense. And so for me personally, I really focused on what are we trying to achieve for the American people. When we walk out of here, at that point, I was absolutely convinced we were going to walk out in January of 2025. But even then, if it was going to be before then, when we walk out, what will we have achieved for the American people? And then how do we organize around those concepts and those policy pillars? And so that's really what I spent my day doing, assembling what I believe to have been the most effective domestic policy team, at least in our lifetimes. Again, having President Trump in the Oval Office certainly helped us with that, but also working with the agencies, working with our incredible cabinet, and really working to implement the America First vision while in the West Wing of the last White House.
Well, Brooke, you brought it up. You talked about President Trump, sort of like there's one speed, right? And we talked about it's Trump time.
One speed.
It's Trump
yes.
time. And everything else
is real fast.
It's super fast.
It's
but,
so fast.
I'm sure you saw it. I saw it. Hogan saw it, and others. It's people would often say, well, you can't operate in that environment. Well, you can. You adjust to it, and you figure it out. But then it provides benefits, and it provides things that you would never have thought otherwise that could be done.
Right.
And the amount of work and accomplishments that got condensed into 4 years was just amazing, right? I mean, I'd served a little bit in a very, very low level in the Bush administration, and things moved at a different pace, right? And so I thought that was a very interesting comment. And of course, Hogan, Brooke talked about having the left come after you. You obviously had some little experience in that and got to talk every day about that.
Yeah. Brooke, you mentioned something I think is important for our listeners to kind of try and wrap their head around, and Chad built upon it. And I'll use a term from Texas that you understand and you know very well, and that's people
Texas.
with people
Here we
with
go.
people
There
with
it is.
people who are all hat, no cattle, right? A lot of people
Well
talk a good
said.
game and don't do much.
That's right.
That administration did a lot. So
Yeah.
what I want you to talk about is how you took some of the scars, the successes from the administration, and use that to kind of build out a think tank in Washington, D.C., a place known for folks with hats and no cattle, and made it into something you call a do tank. Explain a little bit about that and some of the successes that you've been able to accomplish in a short amount of time, because the mindset's now different. We don't have to sit around and talk about it forever. We can just step in and start doing it.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that, Hogan. And I think we should never stop talking about the accomplishments of what was basically just a handful of years. And think about, we had, the whole first year, I think, was sort of getting organized. You had a businessman. We didn't have 1,000 people ready to show up on day one. We only had a couple dozen. And so figuring out that first year, then of course the fourth year, we were dealing with an international pandemic. And so when you think about the fact that we became energy independent, we secured the border, we had the lowest poverty rates in the history of our country, especially for those with the least among us, which for those of us that have been working in policy for a long time was just a prayer answered. The job numbers that were unbelievable. No one thought any of that was possible. A deregulatory agenda that completely unleashed an economy and created an environment where the single mom from Detroit could actually find a good job and get her kids into good schools and have health care that would actually serve her. All of these things, the international success. So I want us to never stop really talking about that you can change things, that it isn't an insurmountable mountain when you move to D.C. or you move into the White House, which I think a lot of people thought we may be able to do a few things, but I think that literally the mountain of achievements were unprecedented. To your question, how do we then translate that into continuing to fight for the American people every single day? And when it became apparent in the late fall of 2020, that whether we liked it or not, whether we thought it was fair or not, whether there was cheating or not, that we were not going to be there on January 21st to begin a second term. And I had spent the better part of the fourth year, we talked about being on offense. I had spent the better part of our fourth year of term one mapping out the agenda for term two. And whether that included, and it did include more tax cuts, more deregulation, how we continue to secure the border, all of the things that we'd already achieved and more.
Doubling down on the things that worked.
Doubling down. And so when it appeared that wasn't going to happen, at least contiguously, then how do we build an infrastructure that isn't just for the next White House or even the one after that? It is for the White House that moves in 50, 60, 100 years from now. And for the first time, we'll have an organization built out that is ready to move forward on all the key policy areas. But not only that for the first time understands how the bureaucracy works and knows how to tame it, deconstruct it, and rebuild it for the sake of the American people. And that's where the inspiration, the vision, I still wake up every day so excited about what we together, not me, but what we together have been able to build in the last couple of years, but much more importantly, what this looks like for the next 100 years.
So that's the vision, right? That's what we do every day at AFPI, obviously under your leadership, and the big team is here. Give folks an idea. Some people know a lot about AFPI. Probably others are saying, okay, what is this? I think for different people, probably know AFPI differently. Some know us from a big tech lawsuit. Some know us by the cadre of individuals that you've assembled here, 9 former cabinet officials, 40 plus senior advisors, both at the White House, departments for former governors, I should say. And the list goes on and on and on. An America First agenda, both at the federal and state level. And so there's a lot of things that people point to. But as you look back and as you describe it to folks, because I know you're on the road a lot, talking to a lot of different people, what do you see as probably like, here's the sweet spot for AFPI as we, look towards a presidential election and moving that America First agenda forward? What is it that, you want to see this, this organization do over the next 18 months?
Here's what we know to be true and righteous, and what our founders believed and wrote about. And just a few weeks ago, we celebrated the 247th anniversary of that. Freedom is what God intended for his people. And that this experiment in self-governance that these 56 men gathered in Independence Hall 247 years ago to declare independence, and that liberty was where this brand new concept of a country would be based on, that the people would govern themselves, that it would not be an elitist group of men or women in a monarchy or a dictatorship, that it would be the people. And the genius of our founders in writing the Constitution and in putting together this experiment. All these years later, we look back and we realize that those truths really are self-evident, and that every day it doesn't take thousands, 10,000s, millions of people. If there are a handful of us, a handful that are committed, that are strategic, that are relentless, that are diligent, that will never give up on the idea of what those founders set out 247 years ago, that we will be successful. And it's funny, when I talk about that, I think a lot of people are very discouraged. I think they're discouraged by what they see in their governing bodies, both Republican and Democrat, frankly. I think they're discouraged by the size and the scope of government. I think they're discouraged seeing generations of our fellow brothers and sisters trapped in poverty. I think they're discouraged when they see the elitists in Washington, D.C., or in their state capitals in Sacramento, California, or Albany, New York, or wherever it may be, that they're making decisions for 5 and 8 and 10-year-old children on what, bathroom they should use. I think people are discouraged, but I think as long as we, speaking of AFPI, have an organization that is in it for the long haul, that's looking at the long game, that never forgets what our country is founded on, that goes back to those constitutional truths again and again and again, and realizes that we can win this. And I think that one of the great takeaways of our administration, of the Trump administration, is, again, to have seen the accomplishments that many thought were not even possible happen in such a short period of time. But for me, it goes even back farther than that, because as we all talked about, my background is Texas. And when I first started on this policy journey, we talked about my degree from the University of Texas, my law degree, at the top of the conversation. Actually, I had a great experience at Texas. But I was a lawyer for a little while. I don't know that I ever really planned to be in public policy. But when I started that journey with Rick Perry all those years ago, he was the brand new governor. I was just out of law school. And in all those years, realizing that you can change the dynamic, you can change the narrative, you can change the policy, you can set up a governing structure of our founders' vision that does create more prosperity for everyone. But again, especially for those with least among us, the states have proven that out. And so for me to have lived that and been a part of it in perhaps, at least at one time, the most important state, I still think it is, Florida and others have come alongside us in their journey toward freedom. But to have seen that and lived that, and then be able to have taken those lessons and applied them in the last White House, and to have seen that effect across the country, is truly one of the greatest blessings. So when people ask me, what is the America First Policy Institute? It is the embodiment of the American dream and fighting for it every day, strategically, without reserve, to ensure that we have the same America for future generations that we all have grown up in and had the incredible blessing to be a part of.
It is a blessing, no doubt about it. And for you to articulate it in those terms and to kind of couch it the way you did, I think is very inspirational. It's one reason, when you are in meetings with us and you kind of get re-fired up about certain things because of the way you put them, it's obvious what you want to accomplish here, like what you did accomplish in the White House, is important to you. It's important to our future. You can feel that passion. Mm-hmm. One of the most important jobs you have by your own admission, and one of the things you're most passionate about, is being a mother, a wife and a mother. I want to talk a little bit about, if we can, your children, because the next generation is something that's going to have to come along and pick up some of the things we've put down and carry them on. You've raised, I've seen pictures online. They've got belt buckles. They've got hats. They're around cows. They do all the Texas things that Texas people do. Talk a little bit about them, their ages, and just how proud you are of them. It's so obvious.
Just real quick, you're from Arkansas. I mean, You're pretending like Texas is like this faraway place.
I lived in Tyler, Texas for 3 years. My dad lived in Dallas.
Hogan's got some cred.
Nice try.
Okay, I'm just saying.
Look, SMU Highland Park is not Texas, so just relax, homeboy.
True.
Ole Miss.
Just relax. Yeah, it's more Texas than Highland Park. Anyway, go right ahead, Brooke.
Oh, I love y'all so much. The first and foremost, what I would love to say is people give me a lot of credit. So the only thing I'm actually really good at is finding the best people, getting us all on a team, and then telling you all to go change the world. And Hogan and Chad, I mean it when I say it, just is so great. And we have so much fun, which I think is an important part of this too. But thank you for bringing up my children. Luke, Jake, Anna, and Lily are today 13, 15, 17, and 18. So if you do that math, we did have 4 children under the age of 5, which was a little bit of a goat rodeo, but a very blessed, happy, chaotic, joyful one. But I often say that really what draws me to this work and what keeps me inspired and invigorated are those beautiful children. And they have been part of this from almost day one, from the moment they were born. They have helped build the Texas Public Policy Foundation in Texas. They were with me in the White House when we moved up. We actually homeschooled them here in D.C. so they could come into the White House almost every day. They weren't used to mom going to work early in the morning and staying till late at night, so we had to recalibrate a little bit. And my husband was a big part of that as well. But I think for all of us that have children or nieces or nephews or, come from families and believe in this country, it really is our children that we're fighting for. And so my oldest, Luke, we call him the leader of the band. He just graduated from high school. And what a joy. He is a beautiful young man. He loves God. He loves Jesus, captain of every sport he ever played, national merit commended, showing his cattle.
Classic underachiever.
Yeah, classic underachiever.
Wait for it. Where is he going to school?
I know, this is going to shock everyone. He's going to Texas A&M.
Okay.
He's going to be in the Fighting Texas Aggie Corps of Cadets, like his dad.
That's a big thing, actually.
Yeah,
it's a very big thing.
I know it is.
His granddad and both of his great-grandfathers were Aggie Corps. And his little brother, Jake, who lights up every room he's ever walked into, well, I'll be working for Jake someday, will probably follow in his footsteps. And my precious little girls, Anna and Lily, who are 13 and 15, they all love America, and they all love this movement. They all believe in freedom. It's just been the joy of my life to be their mom, and that's the single most important job. I had a sign in my office, I don't know if either one of you remembered, that when you walked in the West Wing, when you walked in, you saw the very first thing it said, there is no more important job than your home and the work you do in your home. And so every morning when I walk into that West Wing and into my office there, right around the corner from Ivanka Trump and Kellyanne Conway and Larry Kudlow, and that was the sign I saw first. And it really, I believe, has been the priority of my life, and very grateful to now be in a position where we're fighting for the country that we will hand off to them and to their contemporaries at some point in the future.
Well, it's really unique. I saw it as well at DHS. I've got a 15 and 16-year-old right now, and when the days get long and the work gets really difficult and you say, well, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
It usually comes back to them. It's sort of like I'm not only leaving a legacy, it's really not about you, but it's about the work that you're leaving and the type of country that you want them to grow up in.
That's right.
And so I think it's unique.
Yeah.
But how you're able to do that job as a mother and that domestic policy council all at the same time, I was able to do a little bit of it at DHS. That's because my wife took over on the home front. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is the toll that it takes. Now, Hogan's sitting back, don't have any children, but you've got animals, I'm sure.
No,
right?
Well, no, but what I will say is, because Sarah and I've known Sarah Sanders since she was 19. I worked for her dad when he was governor. I don't know how anybody, whether it was you or Sarah or Kellyanne, Chad, did the job you did with children. I couldn't keep my head above water, and I'm just myself. It was so difficult. So it's such admiration I have for y'all to be able to balance all those things, and you to watch you and Sarah just kind of take that time and be able to compartmentalize different things like that. I always thought was really impressive. I really did, because I don't know how anyone does it.
Well, it's interesting. I get that so much. And my response is, I actually think those 4 kiddos, and when I went into the White House, they were 3rd grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and 8th grade. And we, went back to Texas all the time. The boys still played baseball. The girls were in their sports teams. We still raised the cattle. My girls show horses. I mean, we stayed really as involved as we possibly could. And for me personally, at least, it all was such a blessing. It really wasn't about compartmentalizing. It was, how do you embrace all of it to the benefit of all of it? And one of the greatest, try not to get too emotional about this, but one of the greatest things one of my kids said to me recently was, and actually a couple of them said it, we were having our dinner every night, and they said, well, Mom, if Mr. Trump goes back to the White House, or, when we take the White House back, are you going to go back? And I said, oh, goodness gracious. That's, I'm so busy with Chad and Hogan and Linda and our team building this 100-year play. I don't know what the future holds. It's really only God knows, literally. But I said I would probably have a hard time doing that because one of you will be in college and 3 of you will be in high school. And that's a very different time of your life than where we were the last time we all went, which is when they were in lower school and middle school. And without fail, each of my kids said, oh, no, Mom, you have to go back. You have to go back and keep serving the country. And I think for those kids to have that sort of reflection and recollection and happy memories of their mom being in the White House, that they'd actually want her to go back and do it again, I thought was really, really special.
Are you sure it wasn't for the White House M&Ms they wanted?
It could have been for the Hershey Kisses.
You sure you thought it was all over the country?
Swag.
They wanted the swag?
The
Is that what it was?
swag was real special.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure they were being truthful.
Yeah. But it was. And so I know people have heard this, but it bears repeating too. There were 5 working moms on the senior team in the Trump White House. I think more than any other White House, Republican or Democrat, at least that I've been able to figure out. 5 of us with school-aged children, Ivanka, Kellyanne Conway, Mercedes Schlapp, myself, and Sarah Sanders. And between the 5 of us, we had 19 school-age kids. These are not kids in college or getting married. These are kids who are getting off to school every morning and figuring out lesson plans. And I think maybe a big reason that our White House was so successful, not just the vision of Donald Trump, not just our incredible cabinet, but I think our senior team, we were such good taskmasters because we were all mothers of multiples of children that, what's Kim Jong-un in a day when you're trying to get 4 kids off to school every morning by 8 a.m., right?
Well, it's such a good point. And, what I found is, again, as the days get long and they get hard, and I'm sure you found it and others found it, is the toll that it takes on you. And so the question that you posed, which is, do I go back into into government service, whatever that looks like? It's not an easy question. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I'm back in, no problem. Yeah. Right. No. For those with children or for other, issues, if they're taking care of elderly parents or whatever it might be, there were multiple years during the Trump administration. I remember missing an Easter. A Christmas because something was occurring and it was, everyone hands on deck. And you don't get those days back. You don't get those holidays back.
No, you're right.
And you see them in photos and you're just, to this very day, I see these photos and I'm like, I have no recollection of that day. And my wife reminds me, yeah, because you weren't there. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not both good and bad. God bless the work that you did and others in that White House and in that administration, because it's I don't think that gets talked about enough.
Well,
let me bring it back to AFPI here, just as Hogan took us off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's what he does. So I bring it back.
Hogan's good at tangents.
I bring it back. I usually am like the steady
You're
voice
the steady
here.
Eddie.
As Hogan gives me nice. Let's take the listeners out on this question, which is a lot of work's been done a little over 2 years now at AFPI, building the ship, as you say, building that cadre of individuals, putting that America First agenda out. What's it going to look like? Where do you see the organization really going? I think you've talked really long term, right? Next 100 years to build this as like a flagship. Maybe the horizon's the next 3 to 5 years. There's going to be a new White House, perhaps, or at least a presidential election. Where does AFPI? How do you see it evolving over these next handful of years?
The America First Policy Institute was never an idea, although a lot of people assumed that it was, but was never an idea that I believed was going to be a couple of years and then we shut down and move into the next White House or whatever that could look like. It was always, how do we build a sustaining effort that will never stop fighting for freedom and for the American dream? And I think a lot of people, especially in this town in Washington, but even in our movement, they play the short game. They think, oh, okay, I've just got to get to, which is in human nature. Just got to get to the next election. If we win the next election, everything will be fixed. Oh, we just got to get this person elected. If that person gets elected, then we're good. That's why when people ask, how has the left, especially the radical left, gotten such a stronghold in our institutions, in our communities, in our elections, in our politics? How is it even reasonable that we're talking about it being okay for a 5-year-old to take, whatever to change? How is that even reasonable? And here's why. Here's how it happens. Because they play the long game. The left plays the long game, and they always have. And our side has never been able to play it effectively. And in so doing, we have begun to watch our country slip away. And so what America First Policy Institute looks like for the next 3 to 5 years is obviously a bare-knuckle brawl on the battlefield for what we know will save America. But for the long haul, it is never losing sight of what it is we're trying to achieve. And guess what? In a state like Texas or Florida, what does that look like? Well, that looks like expanding religious liberty. That looks like figuring out how to secure the border, especially in my home state of Texas. That looks like creating an environment where parents can choose their own kids' education rather than the government choosing it. And those are steps we have moved a long way toward. In a state like California, guess what? That's not happening in the next 3 to 5 years. That's a 20, 30-year play. But AFPI is in it for the 20, 30, 50, 100-year play, and that is going to make all the difference as we work to preserve this country for our future children, grandchildren, and beyond.
Well, well said. Well said. Brooke, thank you for coming on the show,
Really
stopping in
appreciate
the
it.
studio, but also your fight for America, the future of America, and obviously building AFPI to push that forward.
And one more thing I'd like to say, I was at an event in North Carolina with one of your coworkers, one of our colleagues, the great Linda McMahon, and we were having a conversation. And one of the people came up to me afterwards. I didn't think about it at the time, and they said something like, "It's not just what you say; it's the way you say it that makes us." And so when you said that, it kind of got me. Again, it gets you kind of emotional, gets you fired up, but it also gives people some hope out there that there is an organization that's pushing forth the policies that make Americans' lives better.
Amen.
And I love that you've taken this mantle. I love what you've built here, and so congratulations to you and to your family.
Thank
and
you.
hopefully that will be kind of a force here for a long time.
For a
So
very
thank you
long
for
time.
everything. Thank you for being here today too.
Well, God bless you, and God bless America. Thank y'all.
All right. Well, folks, make sure you subscribe today so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. Thank you.
Text the word TANK to 70107. That's TANK to 70107 to get exclusive content from the Tank Podcast and to learn more about the America First Policy Institute.